Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'll be sharing with you how I made this fitted gown with a gong sleeve and also a double sleeve and a neckline illusion on top. So if it's your first time viewing my channel, please don't forget to hit on the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and also leave your comments at the comment section. And if you're a returning subscriber, thank you for always watching and supporting my channel. So let's start. So the first thing I've done is to mark out all my vertical measurements. I've gone ahead to mark my shoulder to bust, shoulder to under bust, and my half length. So if you notice the joining at the upper part of the dress, you notice that it is not at the waistline. So that's why I'm making use of half length. And to get your half length is your under bust plus 3 inches. So my under bust is 12 plus 3, I have 15 inches. So I went ahead to mark my basic neckline of 3 by 2.5 inches. So after that, what I'm going to do next is to place my tape, and I'm going to mark my shoulder circumference divided by 2, and I'm going to mark. Then I added half inch because I'm attaching sleeve to the dress. From that point, I went down by 1 inch, and at that 1 inch, I'm going to be drawing my shoulder slant. So I'll draw the line from my shoulder down to my neckline. After doing that, the next thing I'm going to do is to mark my chest line. To get your chest line is your bust circumference divided by 6 plus 1.5 inches. So I have 7 inches. So from that 7 inches I marked, I'm going to place my ruler and I'm going to draw a straight line. After drawing the straight line, the next thing I'm going to do is just to outline there as CL, meaning chest line. So whatever I have at my shoulder, I'm going to place my tape and I'm going to mark it down at my chest line. So the reason why I'm doing this is to make sure the line from the shoulder to the chest line is a straight line. So after marking that, the next thing I'm going to do right now is to divide what I have. So I have 7 inches, which is my armhole. So I'm going to divide it by 2. After dividing it by 2, I'm going to come in by half inch, and from there I'm going to place my French curve, touching my shoulder down to my chest line. So after drawing my armhole curve, the next step is to mark my dart, and I'm going to measure my nipple to nipple divided by 2, and I'm going to mark at my chest line, my bust line, my under bust, and also at my half length. So after marking it, I'm just going to place my ruler and I'm going to draw a straight line connecting all the dots that I marked. After connecting it, the next step is to mark my dart intake. At my under bust, I'm going to be marking 1 inch dart intake at both sides. At the half length, I'm going to be marking 1 inch dart intake at both sides. So after marking that, the next step I'm going to take is to place my ruler and I'm going to connect the line, drawing a straight line. So after drawing the line, I'll go ahead to use my marker to outline it so that it will be very visible for you to see. So the next step I'm going to take is to mark the cup area of the bustier. So I'm just going to place my French curve, touching the bust point, and then the 1 inch dart intake at the under bust. So after marking for that point, I'm going to turn my French curve this way, and I'm also going to mark for the other side of the cup. So after marking out, this is what I have. So to draw my princess dart curve, remember at the armhole we divided it into 2. So from that point, I'm just going to connect it down to my bust point. So to make the mark very visible, I'm just going to place down my French curve and I'm going to place it connecting or touching that half inch at the armhole, and I'm going to connect it down to the bust line. So after connecting, the next thing I'm going to do is At that line at my armhole, I'll be coming down by ½ inch and I'll be going up by ½ inch from that line. So after doing that, what I'm going to do next is to place my French curve, and I'm going to connect it down back to my bust line. So after connecting it, this is what I have. So what I'm going to do next is to take the last line and I'm going to outline it. So the next step is to work on the armhole side of the princess dart, because to avoid shortage at the armhole. So that ½ inch I took, I'm just going to replace it, giving me 1 inch. So to avoid shortage, I'm going to add ½ inch, making it 1.5, and I'm going to connect back. So the reason why I'm doing this is that most times after cutting your princess dart, you notice that one part is actually shorter than the other part. So with this, you will not be having that. So after doing that, I'm just going to connect it back to my chest line. But before I do that, I'm going to insert my body circumference. So at my bust area, I'm going to mark my bust circumference. After marking my bust circumference, I'm just going to add ½ inch in case I have shortage while joining at the bust. After doing that, I'm going to mark my 1.5 sewing inch allowance. So this 1.5 is not a constant, you can use more than that. So the next step is to go over to my under bust. At the under bust, I'm going to be inserting my under bust circumference divided by 4. After marking that, I'll go ahead and measure the dart intake I have at this point, which is 2 inches, and I will go ahead to replace it. After that, I'll mark back my 1.5 inch sewing allowance. Going down to the half length, I'm going to insert my waist circumference divided by 4. After marking my waist circumference divided by 4, I'll mark the dart intake, and then I'll go ahead to mark my 1.5 sewing allowance. So after doing this, what I'm going to do is to take my ruler and I'm going to connect the line from my under bust, from my bust to my under bust and down to my half length. So after doing this, I'm just going to place my French curve and I'm going to connect it back to my armhole area. So after doing that, I'll go ahead to take my marker to outline the armhole area and other necessary parts of this particular pattern. So this is what I have after drafting this part. So the next thing we are going to be working on is the neckline. So at this point, you're going to determine what you actually want, how deep you want your neckline to be. So I'm just going to place my tape this way. You can take your measurements this way, or you can just go down by 1 inch after your chest line or 1 inch after your bust line, or you can just leave it at the chest line. So I'm just going to mark my chest line and I'm going to connect it down to that point. So this is what I have after I'm done marking out. So the next step I'm going to take right now is just to cut out my pattern. So this is what I have after I'm done cutting. So next we'll be moving over to the back pattern. So just like we marked out the front, I did the same thing at the back. I marked the basic neckline of 3 by 2 inches, marked my shoulder line, drew my armhole just like we did for the front, and marked all my vertical measurements. So before I begin any drafting, I make sure I marked out 2 inches zipper allowance. So all my measurements will be starting from that zipper allowance. So next is to mark my dart intake. I'm going to mark 3.5 inches at my bust line, at my under bust and half length, and all my measurements are starting from my zipper allowance. Next, I'm going to place my tape and I'm going to mark my shoulder to bust plus 1 inch. So this is where my dart will be starting from. So after doing that, what I'm going to do is to go down and connect the initial 3.5 inches I marked. So after doing that, I'm going to measure about ½ inch on both sides. So the reason why I'm doing this is that I want my back pattern to be very simple. So what I'm going to do is from that shoulder to under bust +1, I'm going to connect my darts from the lower part to stop at that point. From that ½ inch I marked at the waistline, I'm going to connect it to that point. So after marking that, I'm just going to insert my body circumference, and remember all the measurements I'm taking is starting from this line, where after marking my zipper allowance, so I marked my bust circumference and I added my 1.5 inch sewing allowance. So my pattern paper is not enough, so I'm just going to attach a little paper to extend my measurements. So what I'm going to do is to place back my tape, and I'm going to mark my 1.5 inch sewing allowance. So after marking that, I'm going to go down to the under bust, and I'm going to mark my under bust circumference divided by 4. And after marking that, after marking my under bust circumference divided by 4, I'm going to go back and measure the dart intake I have. So after measuring the dart intake, you're going to replace it on your pattern. Then you go ahead to mark your sewing allowance. So just like I said, that 1.5 is not a constant. At my half length, I'm going to be inserting my waist circumference divided by 4. After doing that, I'll mark the dart intake, and I'm going to mark. Then I'm going to add my sewing allowance, which is my 1.5 inch. So after doing that, I'm going to place my tape, and I'm going to connect back my pattern. After marking it, I'm going to go ahead to use my marker, and I'm going to outline all the marks that I have made. After outlining all the marks, the next thing you're going to do is to work on your dart. So if you don't want to sew your dart while sewing, you can just blend it in this way and cut your pattern. But I will be doing mine while sewing. So the next step is just to cut out your back bodies. So before I cut out, I'm going to get rid of puff at the lower part of my dress. So I'm just going to mark ½ inch, and I'm going to extend it to the upper part of my pattern. Then I'm going to cut it out while cutting out my pattern. So at this point, if you find this tutorial very interesting and educative, please don't forget to hit on the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and also turn on your notification button. So this is my back pattern. I'm done drafting. So we're moving over to the skirt pattern. So over to the skirt pattern. So remember, at the upper part of the dress, we stopped at 15 inches. The shoulder to under bust is 15 inches. So whatever measurement we are going to take, we are going to start from that 15 inches. So I'll place my tape at 15 inches, and I will go down to mark the full length of my gown. So the full length of my gown is 43 inches. I'm making my gown not to be too long. So after that 43 inches, I'm just going to add 2 inches for folding or turn up allowance. So the next step I'm going to take is to mark my hip point. So from there, I'm going to place my tape and measure 10 inches. So the reason why I'm measuring 10 inches, we made use of half length. Half length is usually above the waistline. So my half length is 15 inches, while my waist length is 17 inches. So if you notice, it's about 2 or 3 inches mostly higher than your waistline. So after marking that 10 inches for my hip point, what I'm going to do next is, at the waist part, I'm going to place my tape, and I'm going to measure my waist circumference divided by 4. So because I'm making use of a princess dart bustier on top, I won't be adding a dart to my skirt. So after marking that, I'll go ahead and mark my 1.5-inch sewing allowance for my skirt pattern. So after marking that 1.5-inch, I'll go back and I will place my tape. Remember, the upper part of this particular dress stopped at 15 inches, which is shoulder to bust. Right now, I'm going to place my tape back at that 15 inches and I'm going to measure my shoulder to knee level. So my shoulder to knee level is 35 inches. So I placed my tape starting from that 15 inches and then measured where 35 was on my tape. So after that, I'm going to mark to my hip point. So I folded this pattern with my hip point. So my hip is 40 divided by 4. I have 10 inches plus 1.5-inch sewing allowance. So whatever I have at my hip, in order to make my skirt a fitted skirt, I'm going to be minusing 2 inches starting from the knee level. So that's my hip point, which is 40 divided by 4, giving me 10 plus 1.5. I'll be minusing 2 inches from it and I have 9.5. That is what I marked from my knee down to my skirt. And then I'll go ahead and connect back my skirt pattern and then I'm going to cut out. After cutting out the front skirt pattern, I'm going to go ahead to cut the back, and to cut the back, I'm going to be adding my zipper allowance in front. After doing that, I'm just going to trace out what I have for the skirt pattern. So after cutting it, this is my skirt pattern for the front and the back pattern. So I also went ahead to slit my back pattern into 2. So join me in my next tutorial where I'll be cutting the lining and also joining the dress. So please don't forget to like, share and subscribe to my YouTube channel and turn on your notification button.